Space, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
Hello and welcome to the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. I'm Tim Robertson, the host of the podcast, and also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. Thank you for downloading and listening. The ALPO collects and analyzes observations of various solar system bodies and associated phenomena, and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, the Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers, also known as the Strolling Astronomer. This podcast depends upon donations from you, our listeners, to keep it alive. If you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, you can donate to it via Patreon by giving as little as $1 a month. If you feel even more generous, for $5, you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. For a monthly donation of $10, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook, and for $35 a month, you receive producer credits on the podcast and 1 year's membership to the ALPO. You can help us out by going to www.patreon, that's patreon.com/observersnotebook. If you'd like to join the ALPO, membership begins at only $18 a year. For more information, you can visit us on the internet at www.alpo-astronomy.org. And you can also find us on Facebook. Just search for ALPO Astronomy up there in the search field on top. And yes, the podcast also has a Facebook page as well. Just search for Observer's Notebook. If you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, please hit the subscribe button. That way you'll never miss another episode. And now, this edition of the Observer's Notebook. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to the Observer's Notebook podcast. We have with us today Brian Cudnik. He is the coordinator of the Lunar Meteoric Impact search section of the ALPO. Welcome back to the podcast, Brian.
Thank you very much.
Now, we're here today to talk about the recent meteor strike on the moon during the lunar eclipse. But before we get into that, why don't you give a little bit of background about yourself before we get started?
Okay, a little bit of background about myself. I started coordinating the Lunar Meteoric Impact search section of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers back in February of 2000, so it's going to be almost 20 years, 19 years now since we've started this. This came about as a result of an observation that I made of a meteoroid impact on the moon back in November of 1999, when there was an effort launched to observe the moon for impacts by Leonid meteors. And so I reported my observation that I made with a 14-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain to the coordinator of this effort, Dr. David Dunham, who immediately confirmed it on his video. And as a result, they were able to look at the videos and find 4 more. And so since then, that's literally sparked a new interest in my area of astronomy. I've presented papers and written books, and I'm actually serving as editor-in-chief of Encyclopedia of Lunar Science for Springer. I did watch the eclipse last Sunday, but unfortunately I missed the meteor impact myself.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the impact that occurred on January 20th during the total lunar eclipse. When did you first hear about the impact? I
actually observed this from a friend's house in Temple, Texas, about 2.5 hours from where I live in Houston. And so we were driving back to Houston Monday afternoon when I got a phone call from Ken Poshedley reporting that he had gotten this report of a meteoroid impact just as totality was starting, which I thought was really, really amazing. I thought I was watching at that time. I must have looked away, or I was actually monitoring the moon with a 8-inch telescope, but I wasn't doing any video. I was just taking still images with a camera that can zoom in a factor of 20 magnification. I was also doing crater shadow timings for Roger Sinnott of Sky and Telescope. but I wasn't videotaping for any or watching for any lunar meteoroid impacts. So we learned about this, and it turned out that a number of other people who were imaging caught this event on their images. And so I'd be interested to find out how many images of this impact were actually captured, since the moon was being widely watched because of the lunar eclipse.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this could be a nice little boon to your section too.
Yeah.
Give it some attention. How
Yeah.
many observations, or most of the observations you receive on this would be videos, correct?
Right. Or in this case, still images that happen to be exposed at the time of the impact.
Okay. All right.
I noticed that there were quite a few of those.
Great. Now,
Mm.
what do we hope to learn from something like this?
Well, we're learning quite a bit, actually, what the amount of debris is in the Earth's region of the solar system. The moon is an excellent impact counter, and it supplements the observations and counts of meteors in the Earth's atmosphere. Naturally, the objects that impact the moon that are visible from the Earth are a little bit larger than what we see typically in the Earth's atmosphere, but it gives us a pretty good idea of just how frequently I understand that some of the estimates put the number of random impacts as two a day that are observable. So it's interesting to know the frequency of the meteoroid impacts, the nature of the impactor, if there's any danger that's posed to any would-be colonies that are set up on the moon, and so forth.
Okay. And now, for us to be able to observe an impact like this, it's fairly probably a fairly large object that hits. Now, what we're seeing in that flash, though, what is that? What is the flash that we're actually seeing?
The flash that we're actually seeing is the expanding fireball of molten and vapor material that expands really quick. The actual explosion is on the order of microseconds, and then the expanding plume, the expanding fireball, lasts on the order of a few milliseconds to maybe a fraction of a second, and that's what we're actually seeing from the Earth as that expands. It has kind of a orangish yellow color to it visually. I noticed that in one image that was taken and posted to spaceweather.com that the impact had a similar color as the one that I saw back in 1999. And it also looked like it was similar in brightness to the fairly bright star that was near the moon during the time of the eclipse.
Oh, that's a good measure to see just how
Mm-hmm.
bright that point was. Very
Mm-hmm.
good. Now, will we see a crater in this spot, or is that something that we probably won't notice?
We very likely will not see a crater, but the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter will probably be able to find the crater. It has done so already. It's found several craters associated with impact flashes that were observed from the Earth.
Oh, I never thought about that. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Now, okay, give us an overview of the section, of the ALPO section, the Lunar Meteoric Impact Search section.
Okay, what we do is, of course, observe the moon for meteoroid impacts. Video is preferred, although if people want to dare doing visual observations, they're welcome to do so. It's really exciting to actually see one of these in real time, but it's very challenging because just a blink of an eye or staring away at the wrong minute can result in a missed impact, and that's why it's very important to at least have a video component, a video camera monitoring the moon for these impacts. What we normally do is we have a couple of types of campaigns that are active. There's the monthly campaign where we monitor the moon. I encourage people to monitor the moon from about 3 to 4 days after new moon when it's a waxing crescent to maybe 2 days after first quarter. However late the person's system can observe without being overwhelmed by glare. And then again from maybe 2 days before last quarter up until 3 or 4 days before new moon on the waning side. The waxing side is going to prove to be more productive for reasons similar as to why we see most of our meteor showers in the morning. In the morning time, the Earth, when we're looking at the sky, we're looking along the direction of the Earth as it moves in its orbit. So it's actually running into any debris that happens to be out there.
That makes sense.
looking at the moon in the evening sky, we're kind of looking like out the rear window, so to speak. But the part of the moon that's facing us is also facing into the material, interplanetary material. Think about driving through a snowstorm, for example. As you're moving through the snowstorm, the snowflakes are hitting the front. And then if you have a trailer behind you, you can see the snowflakes, if it's tall enough, hit the trailer. So we do the monthly campaigns for those that are interested, and also that's in conjunction with NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. They also do a monthly campaign, and also the Midas program over in Europe. They do a regular monthly campaign of monitoring the moon. Another event that is more people are usually more interested in is when the annual showers are active, such as the Lyrids, the Perseids, the Geminids, the major showers. That greatly increases the probability of being able to detect a meteoroid impact on the moon. And so I'll put out a special call for observations if the moon is favorably placed during the maximum of the annual meteor shower. If the moon is full or new or a very fat gibbous or too close to the sun, of course, we're not able to do much with that. But there are times when the moon is a nice waxing crescent in the evening sky during the peak of the Perseids, for example, and that's where we potentially can get some good results.
That's very good. Yeah, we talked about this on an earlier podcast, and it was fascinating to me because really the equipment you need for this is pretty much any telescope, right? With actually a motor drive, so it could track the moon.
Right. Although it is the larger the telescope, the higher the probability that you would have to record an event. Small telescopes would probably only get the brightest and rarest events, but something on the order of 8-inch, 10-inch, or even a little bit larger with a wide field would be best for this kind of work. I did record a lunar meteor impact from the Geminids back in December of 2010 with an 8-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain, and it was quite faint in my video, but a person with a somewhat larger telescope, a 10-inch, you could see the flash a little bit more well-defined in his video.
That's good. So your recommendation would be probably your best chance to see this type of event is during a meteor shower.
Correct. Yeah. Although these do happen regularly, I see reports fairly regularly from NASA of impacts that are recorded at seemingly random times.
That's amazing. Okay, and do you have other? Well, so you mentioned the two programs that you have. You have the monthly program and then meteor shower programs. Anything else that you guys work on during the month or during the year?
Those are pretty much it at the moment. Of course, when we get a total lunar eclipse, as we saw last week, we have the opportunity to see random impacts during that time. So I haven't really been pushing that lately, but now with this event, it sounds like it's going to be something that we need to get back on the ball with.
Right. Another reason to observe a lunar eclipse. Like you, I was doing the eclipse timings and things like that, and not even thinking about lunar meteors. It's pretty wild. How many contributors do you have to the section currently?
There's usually a handful of active observers. We have a group in Brazil that contributes regularly. They have another group in Europe and Italy that contributes. We have an individual on the East Coast. So it's basically a handful. It's not the most active section, unlike sections like the Jupiter section or sections that involve watching giant planets on a regular basis, but we do get contributors from time to time.
Okay, and where are your observations normally published?
They're normally I keep them in an archive, and I publish them on the website for confirmation. And periodically, I do present papers at events like Lunar and Planetary Science Conference that they have here in the Houston area each year. I don't have a paper this year, but actually it's been a few years since I've published. But those are a couple of possibilities. And one of the projects that I really do want to get back to working on is producing a comprehensive catalog of these impact flash events.
Okay. Now, are you going to put an article together for the journal, the ALPO,
Um,
on this?
I have been putting together. I have been providing the section report that is asked for on a regular basis.
Okay.
Um, but at some point, it probably would be good to put together a full-fledged article, especially with the lunar eclipse event that recently took place.
Right. You got to jump on it while the fire's hot. You know,
Right, right.
get people motivated about this because this sounds really exciting. It sounds like something I might want to. Because I've got a little video camera that I could hook up and
Mhm.
just let it run while the telescope does its thing. That's a good idea.
Right.
Anything else you want to share about the section?
And it's also with your video camera, it's also essential to have like some sort of a timing source. It could be an
Hmm.
audio WWV or something, so that you know exactly when the any events that you observe take place.
That's a good point. Very good point. Now, aside from this, you're also you were I met you last year at the SAS conference in Ontario,
Right.
and you gave a talk about an observatory that you're working with. Can you talk a little
Yeah.
bit about that?
Okay. Well, the observatory is nearing completion. We have a total of three domes. One dome is the existing solar observatory that's been there for 20 years, and then the other two domes will house a plane wave 24-inch and a Meade 16-inch. And it's going to be primarily a teaching observatory, although we should be able to do some observing, some research work. One of the things that I really do want to do with this observatory, with the Meade 16-inch, is to begin a patrol of Jupiter meteors. There's been about a half a dozen fireballs that have been videotaped over the last 10 years in Jupiter's atmosphere. And so I want to start a project to monitor Jupiter as much as I can to see how often these things happen, and also, we can monitor the weather on Jupiter as well to support research, planetary science research, and of course, working with the moon and monitoring the moon for meteoroid impacts. So we can go a little bit fainter with our plane wave 24-inch. We also want to get an infrared video camera to be able to go smaller still with the plane wave. So, and with two telescopes, we should be able to at least get preliminary confirmations on events if they both happen at the same time, as seen through the two telescopes, the instruments. Then it's very likely that it's a confirmed impact. Although the ideal criterion is that the telescopes are separated by some 20 or 30 kilometers. These are separated more like by 30 or 40 meters. So, but at least it's it's something that we can start with, among other projects that we have in mind for the observatory. So we can involve students in the work, and they can be involved in collecting the data and processing it once we get the pipeline up and running.
Now, what's the name of the observatory again?
Right now, it's simply called the Prairie View Observatory.
And that's where?
That's on the campus of Prairie View A&M University, Prairie View, Texas, which is about an hour's drive northwest of downtown Houston, Texas. And Prairie View A&M University is part of the Texas A&M system of universities. It's what's called an HBCU, an historically black college or university.
Okay. And what's
So
your
we get
role?
to
What's your role with the observatory?
My role, essentially, I'm a coordinator, laboratory coordinator. So I'm coordinating the goings on right now with the construction project, and then eventually to get everything up and running. So, like I said, we're getting close to finishing, and toward the end of this month, we should get our telescopes, and we're going to have them installed by PlaneWave, and then get them tested out and set up for actual imaging. So we're going to have an opening ceremony at some point in the summer, possibly during August. We might even be able to get first light before that, depending on how things go.
That sounds really exciting. Yeah, I remember your presentation during the conference, and it was very cool. I think I even released it as an individual podcast, your talk.
Right. So I do plan to give an update to that this June,
Okay.
assuming that it's June 1st.
Okay.
So,
Great. Great. Look forward to it. Now,
yep, I'm here.
how could everybody get a hold of you if they want to contact you?
Well, they can contact me through the ALPO website. They can also email me at bmcudnik@gmail.com.
Okay. Are you on the Twitter or anything too, or?
I don't tweet, but I do Facebook.
Okay. So people just
Mm.
look you up on Facebook.
Right.
Okay, great. Well, Brian, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
Sure thing.
And good luck with those meteors.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Observer's Notebook podcast. Again, I want to thank our guest, Brian Cudnik, for coming on and giving us a little talk about the recent meteor strike on the moon. That was amazing. We upload a new episode of the Observer's Notebook every few weeks. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. If you do, please rate and review us. I really appreciate it. You can also listen to us on iHeartRadio, Soundcloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, and that little box in your house, the Amazon Echo. You can help donate. You can help support the podcast by donating to it via Patreon. You can give up to $35 a month, where you'll receive 1 year's membership to the ALPO and producer credits. And with that, I want to thank the producer of this podcast, Steve Siedentop, for his continued generous support of the Observer's Notebook. Thank you very much, Steve. The link for Patreon, as well as the link for the ALPO, is in the show notes. If you want to contact me and chat with me about future topics for the podcast, you can email me at commentman@commentman.net or on Twitter at observersnbpod. Until next time, my hope is you always have clear and steady skies. Thanks for listening.